You're tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
Welcome back to The Andrew Lawton Show, Canada's most irreverent talk show here on True North. I don't know if I've mentioned this in the past. Obviously, with 338 ridings in Canada and more parties than I can count, we can't interview every candidate in every riding. But I also, at the same time, know that sometimes local candidates are a tremendous part of the story of Canadian politics. Indeed, Canadians elect candidates. They don't elect prime ministers. They don't elect parties per se. They elect individual members of parliament at the local level. So what I've decided to do on this show in the next few weeks of the campaign is find the ridings where something interesting is happening, individual candidates who have a great story to tell or who I think are personally interesting or compelling, and also just people that may come across our radar for whatever reason in the campaign. I don't want to box ourselves in here, but I will say one of the interesting stories that I've come across has been that of Tariq Elnaga, who's running for the Maverick Party in Banff, Airdrie. Now, as we'll talk about in a moment, Banff, Airdrie is shaking up to be a pretty crowded field with a lot of candidates who you'd think would be going after the same voters, but only one of them has moved to Alberta because they fell in love with the Calgary Stampede. And that's Tariq Elnaga, who joins me on the line now. Tariq, thanks for coming on. It's great to talk to you.
Andrew, likewise. Thank you for having me.
Now, as I mentioned just in the introduction to this segment, I'm trying to find candidates across the country who have unique stories, unique perspectives on things. And when I learned about what brought you to where you are today, living in Alberta and also running as a Maverick Party candidate, I said, okay, I have to talk to him. I have to get him on the show. You actually are a relatively new Canadian. I know you became a citizen about 5 years ago. But Tell me what happened when you visited Alberta in 2010.
So yeah, I was here on vacation, and I usually travel on vacation to go to a certain event, a sporting spectacle, a festival, a concert, etc. And I'd never been to a rodeo in my life and have zero animal experience. And I'd come to the Calgary Stampede in 2010, and I sat in the stands and I watched the rodeo, and I thought, man, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to be on the other side of that fence. And that something happened, and I decided this was going to be it. I went home, I quit my job, sold the house, sold the car, and made plans to move to Alberta to start to get into rodeo.
Now, home at the time was the United Arab Emirates, which I'm guessing
Correct.
is not a big rodeo spot.
It is not. No. So born and raised in Dubai, pretty much city kids. What it is, where the similarities are, is actually it's a big oil and gas economy too. And we could chat about that in a little while. But my corporate career as an engineer was relatively easy to transfer in the sense of I grew up in an oil and gas world, but my recreational, personal, and now athletic life is completely different.
I know Dubai is a city that has lots going on, very worldly. You obviously had traveled the world. What was it about the Alberta rodeo experience that grabbed you and made you say, I want to move there in a way that other places you had visited hadn't up until that point?
I think it was how unclinical it was. So the thing is, Dubai is a pretty pristine city growing up. Mm-hmm. It's very, very pristine, very modern, very new, and very Western too, in the sense of like just modern. But there was something about the dirt, like something about the grit and the perseverance of cowboy culture, and that grit that you see very rarely anywhere else. And I was like, man, there's something about that. There's something about that value of like you see people getting bucked off pretty hard at a rodeo, and they're like, you know what, we're getting right back on, So and there was a level of authenticity in the mystique of the Western culture, but also the values that it represents that were really attractive. And we talked about grit, but perseverance is another one. Risk taking is another. Hard work was one. And it's also a culture that's built around community and respect. And those are all values that I'm like, this speaks to me. Right. And it's very different than everything I've used to. And if there's one way to do it, then put myself entirely out of my comfort zone. Alberta was going to be it.
I know, even though I agree with most Albertans on most things politically, I still get it when I'm there, being from Ontario, being viewed just as an Easterner. And I'm curious how you felt in adjusting to being a Westerner, if you felt immediately accepted, or even to this day accepted as a Westerner in a group of people that are very leery of even people that come from cities, let alone from another country, and want to jump into this lifestyle.
Andrew, I'll tell you, the reception was amazing. So
Hmm.
I did three things on my first 3 days in Alberta. So I didn't know a soul in the province. And in the first 3 days, I bought a pair of cowboy boots, I bought a set of power tools, and I bought a pickup truck. And I thought, I've got my Alberta starter pack ready here. But
But
on
now you fast forward, and the pickup trucks are like the things that are under attack now. No one's allowed to drive them,
exactly.
they say.
Exactly. But then on the fourth day, I reached out to the local ag society in Airdrie here and I said, hey, I want to get into the Western way of life. What do I do? And then instantly doors started opening where I had volunteer opportunities to be at the back end of a rodeo, learned how to ride, learned how to drive tractor, how to drive combine, etc. So an incredibly welcoming community. I can tell you after 8 or 9 years of being here, there isn't a rodeo I could go in a 500-kilometer radius where I don't know at least 200 people there and I feel 100% at home. Like I feel so unbelievably accepted. Just recently, the Western Horse Review, which is the biggest equestrian magazine in Canada, reached out and did an interview and featured me on the cover. It's just exceptional the level of doors that are open here. And I will say this, as long as you come with a level of authenticity and respect around Western culture, the West welcomes all. Like it's a very inclusive, very welcoming community. They don't care what your background is. What it is, are you willing to put in the hard work and live the way of life? So it's been an amazing trip. Like I've never once in 9 years of being here ever felt on the outside.
I
So
know that you became, as we mentioned, a citizen in 2016, but you're also
correct.
identifying with a party that is very much Albertan over Canadian, a lot of people would argue.
Mhm.
And I'm wanting you to explain, if you can, about that dynamic, because you've talked about in other materials and online this thing that a lot of Canadians who are from Ontario and Quebec and BC don't get, which is this Western alienation. But I'm
Right.
curious how you first off, acknowledge this was a thing and why you
Mhm.
wanted to go where you are now, which is actually running as a candidate for this party.
You bet. So thanks for that question, Andrew. And when we're a West focused party rather than just Alberta, so the four Western provinces. So I think Manitoba, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC. But this comes from my professional life where I'm in oil and gas, and very quickly within the first 10 minutes, and I grew up in the Middle East, so there's a perspective. I lived through Gulf War One and Gulf War Two, and Gulf War One was 100% a commodity war. It was Saddam invaded Kuwait for their oil resources, and I remember my parents taping down the window seams because they were worried about a biological attack the night before Gulf One started. And then, so very quickly, you learn that oil is a precious commodity. And then I move here, and we're given the gift of the third largest resource, or third largest oil resources, rather, in the world. And we've decided as a country, you know what, keep it in the ground. We don't want to use it. We'd rather buy the Saudis. We'd rather buy foreign oil. And that became apparent within 10 minutes. Yet, that's the resource that provides wealth and prosperity to build all the social programs that we love as Canadians. So that's, our healthcare systems, our education systems, our social support systems, etc. And I looked at that and I said, we are getting completely battered. We pay a gigantic amount of our wealth. 80% of Canada's wealth is generated in the West. 85% of it is spent in the East. So we generate this wealth. The East continues to take from that wealth, but shuts down our industries. So one of the two things has to give. We have trade barriers within our own country. I mean, heck, you couldn't bring in a case of wine from BC into Alberta. That's illegal. So we've got trade barriers within our own country. So the question becomes, either those trade barriers open up and it's a fair trading system within Canada, or we start to say, well, that wealth that you're taking, let's keep it here, because as it is, our industry has been battered over the last 8 or 9 years that I've been here. So, I mean, a long answer, but the reason why I'm looking at a West-only party is I've always, and this is no secret, it's on the internet and so on. I've always been, as soon as I was a Canadian citizen, a CPC supporter. And the CPC, well, we've seen what the 2019 election looks like, but there's all these spending commitments that they continue to pander to Quebec for. And then the straw that broke the camel's back, and really why the Maverick Party, is the carbon tax. So Aaron O'Toole comes in with his own carbon levy. There's four major industries in my riding here: oil and gas, agriculture, tourism, and aviation. all massively impacted by a carbon tax. I'm all for environmental responsibility, but Andrew, I think a carbon tax it's naive to think that that's what's going to save the planet. And all it does is it punishes our industries, and then continues to support foreign industries. Oil companies are mobile. If they're not going to produce in Alberta, they're going to move somewhere else. Or it shocks me that we still buy $60 to $65 million a day of foreign oil a day in Canada when we've got it right here.
Let's talk about your riding for a moment, because the Banff Airdrie is shaping up to be one of the more unique ones. You've got a Conservative with a very strong margin in 2019 that's seeking re-election. You've got a PPC candidate going after right-of-center voters. You've got the Maverick Party, which generally is going after right-of-center voters. You've got an independent in Derek Sloan, who's going after generally right-of-center voters. And even though that Conservative support in 2019 for the CPC was very strong, is there a risk that all of these people going forward saying that, you know what, we want to do things differently than the Conservative incumbent wants to do things, do you think that actually risks someone getting in that is very similar to the things that you oppose, pro-carbon tax, anti-oil, anti-Alberta?
Right. So, Andrew, it's a great question. And I'll say one, let's celebrate that it's a democracy, because if you only had one choice, then it wouldn't be. This is still the free West, and we celebrate that people have a choice. Now, in terms of where my opponents are and the fellow candidates, you're absolutely right. We have a long-serving Conservative candidate, 13 years in office, who also happens to be, and I'm not one to do character attacks on any of my opponents, so I strictly speak on policy and platform. So we've got who happens to be the chief whip of Erin O'Toole. Erin O'Toole doesn't represent the Conservative interests of the West anymore. And this is the reason why you're starting to see more Conservative options in that field, is because, sadly, the Conservative Party, I think, Alberta and Saskatchewan could not get any more blue. Every riding except one went blue in the last election. But I look at it and I say, have they really taken our vote for granted? And then for our loyalty, they give us a carbon tax. Erin O'Toole's first meeting with Premier Legault says Energy East is off the table. This is a pipeline that's already 70% in the ground, and will create jobs across Canada. So that Quebec pandering is what really turned me off from the CPC. And then I look at the other two parties. So one is still a Federalist Party that is run by a Quebecer. And for them to truly secure seats in Quebec, then they're still going to have to need to rely on that Alberta wealth. No more, right? There's no more pandering is where I'm saying. Now, the independent candidate, and I'll talk about myself. So the independent candidate, he's never lived a day in the West, never lived a day in this riding, never worked in a Western industry. And if I was one of his constituents on Ontario, and I'd say, I believe in your message and I'm voting for you, and suddenly you've abandoned me and moved halfway across the country in an area which you've never lived in, because you have a lot of your policies ready-made, like Alberta's more open than everyone else, et cetera, and say, well, here it is, I would feel disappointed. I would feel betrayed by my own MP to say, hey, you're the person I voted for and you've just left and deserted me. Like, I would pretty sure if I ran in this riding, my constituents would say the exact same thing if I moved to Ontario, right? You've just deserted us. And then the difference between the Maverick Party, Andrew, and all the other three candidates is that we're the only party that speaks exclusively for the West. We have 0 votes to lose in Ontario and in Quebec and in the Maritimes. And the premise of the party is incredibly simple and beautiful. If it's good for the West, it's good for us. And that's our job. My job is to speak only and exclusively for a Western constituent.
One of the challenges we see in politics in Canada is that the only region that's really allowed to do that is Quebec. And in a lot of cases, politicians encourage it when Quebec asserts its independence, but when the West does it, you get people saying, oh yeah, they're just whining, they're just complaining, and all of that. And I'm curious, though, when you see and hear the anger coming from a lot of people in the West, and when I've been out there speaking, interviewing people, I hear it as well. Do you get a sense that people want to make things better, or is it just we want out? We want to separate? Because I know even in the more independence-minded community in Alberta, this is a big challenge. You get some people that are saying Canada's done, Confederation's done, we want an independent Alberta, and others that say, okay, let's try to fix it first. Let's try to tiptoe our way forward, start with equalization, maybe we do an Alberta police force, an Alberta pension, and so on.
So the beauty of the Maverick Party is it takes both folds in. So we have what we call our twin track approach, track A and track B, and I'll tell you the politics behind it and also the general language that I use in my town halls with folks. So track A is to bring what you talked about is fairness and equity back to the West, and say these are the things that we want to bring representation, equalization, manage our own resources, and have provincial autonomy on not just money but things like law enforcement, and you touched upon that, even things like firearms laws. So I look at it and I say this is a very different approach than any of the other federal parties. Even the Conservatives are saying, well, you're going after illegal gun owners. I'm like, you know what, Toronto dictates a lot of that policy for the rest of the country. If Toronto want to ban all their guns, have at it. It's none of my business. But for the West, we want our own regional chief firearms officer, which right now sits in Miramichi, New Brunswick, and administers firearms laws for the entire country. No, we're looking at a regionalized approach for any of those things, including representation, fairness, and so on. That's track A. Now, if that is not enough, and we go out into our constituents and say, it's not what Tariq said, it's not what the Maverick Party says, but if our constituents say that is not enough, then track B is a push for independence. And we have, yes, members that want independence right away, and we have members that are still very attached to the maple leaf, but not necessarily attached to Ottawa. So the way I say it and the way I kind of differentiate track A and track B is one is a divorce of Ottawa, which all of our members agree on. So they're all very much in favor of. The second one, which is a divorce of Canada, some are there, some aren't there yet. And I think it will depend on what our constituents want once track A is done.
Where are you, though?
So I sit on both, and I say, I'm glad that you asked, but I sit on both. And I say that if track A is enough to make Western Canada an equal and well-represented partner in Canada, great, and then I think we've accomplished a very solid part of what we want to do. But if that's not enough, then I am not afraid in any way, shape, or form to push for independence. It's the platform I'm running on. It will be my job, and I am not afraid to do it. So it really depends.
But you're saying you want to try to make it work first.
Exactly. So, and our track is very transparent, is yes. So rather than push for independence from the first 5 minutes, even laying the foundations of independence, the right way to do it would be to do track A first, which is to get, provincial autonomy back. Let us manage our own affairs, because then that makes the push for independence much easier. So it is the first logical step of it.
Banff Airdrie in Alberta has a number of candidates. The Maverick Party candidate there is Tariq Elnaga, who joins me now. Tariq, thanks very much for coming on and sharing a bit about your background and what you hope for the riding. Very much appreciated.
My pleasure, Andrew. I've been following you for a long time, so you're an absolute rock star. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Well, that is very kind of you to say, Tariq. Thanks
Excellent.
very much. And that does it for us for today. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. As mentioned earlier, the coverage is going to look a bit different in the next couple of days as I am joining the Conservative Party of Canada tour to report on what's happening there. But we will be back with another show early next week. This is Canada's most irreverent talk show here on True North, The Andrew Lawton Show. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.